You know, you open up any news site and you're just bombarded by these headlines that feel like they're straight out of a disaster
Oh,
movie.
oh, absolutely.
You see crash imminent or the debt bomb is ticking. And my favorite, the one that comes back every single year, is China crisis. Collapse is just around the corner.
Right. With the falling dragon graphic.
Exactly. The falling dragon, the plunging stock chart. It's always this image of a sudden, total financial disaster. But if you just take a step back for a second, I mean, if we're constantly being told the world is about to end and, well, here we are,
Still here.
still here, messy, complicated for sure, but standing. So what's the actual practical value of these dramatic predictions for us? And that's really what we want to get into in this deep dive. We've got this whole stack of sources you sent over filled with these prophecies, and we want to just flip the script on them. How do we stop being passive, fearful, and start being active analysts who can actually use these warnings?
That is the critical mindset shift. And I
Yeah.
think we have to start with the core problem right up front.
Right.
The fundamental mistake we all make is confusing genuine risk analysis with prophecy. A prophecy suggests a fixed, predetermined future. It's like looking into a crystal ball.
You're just waiting for it to happen.
Exactly. And that makes you passive. Our whole goal here is to trade that crystal ball view for a map view. A map is a tool for action, for preparation.
Okay, let's unpack that, because this problem, this dramatic prophecy thing, it's everywhere. Why the focus on total collapse? Why do media outlets, even some big-name investors, always gravitate toward the most extreme financial disaster scenario? It's like there's no middle ground.
Because prophecies are stories. They're narratives, not natural laws.
Right.
They absolutely start with real facts.
Right, like rising debt levels or a slowing market.
Precisely. They start with a real input. But the conclusion isn't analysis. It's interpretation that's been shaped to fit a story. And the media, or anyone trying to get your attention, operates under what one source calls a time horizon constraint.
A time horizon constraint. What does that mean in practice?
It means they have a very, very short window to grab you, tell you a story that makes sense, and one that you'll remember.
So they need a shortcut.
They need a shortcut, and that forces everything into the classic, emotionally satisfying three-act drama. You have a beginning, the status quo, then you introduce the conflict, the rising tension, and then you must have the big finish.
The climax, the resolution, the crash.
The crash, the boom, whatever it is. It's the only way to squeeze a complex, decade-long trend into a neat 3-minute segment that gives you a sense of closure.
And you contrast that neat little story arc with reality, which, as our sources point out, is, well, it's a long, noisy, non-linear process.
It's messy. It's complicated.
Yeah.
And usually things end with a whimper or a messy muddle through, not a big satisfying explosion. And that's the real danger of buying into the drama. If you believe that story, you become a passive spectator. You're just waiting for the future that's supposedly already been written.
Right.
And that state of waiting, that's what creates fear.
And fear leads to bad decisions, or no decisions at all.
It paralyzes you. You stop preparing because you think, well, what's the point? The future is already set.
So this is the challenge I keep bumping up against. If the stories are exaggerated and the big conclusion, the crash on Tuesday, is almost always wrong, should we just ignore it all? Are these warnings about debt and demographics completely useless?
No, absolutely not. And that's the key insight here. Just because a narrative is exaggerated, just because its conclusion is probably wrong, does not mean it's useless.
Okay.
We have to stop asking, is this prediction going to come true? And start asking a different question. What vulnerability is this prediction exposing?
And that's the pivot. That's where we bring in this new framework of using these warnings as a stress test.
Precisely. They don't predict the future. They perform a stress test on the present. They show you the system's vulnerabilities at structural breaking points. If a big, loud narrative is screaming that X is going to collapse, then X is almost certainly where the real fragility is.
I really like the analogy one of the sources uses here. It compares the prophecy, the crystal ball, to a detailed diagram of a bridge. The prophecy says the bridge will fall next Tuesday.
Which is terrifying, but not very helpful.
Right. But the stress test view takes that same fear, the fact that the bridge is old, and turns it into useful knowledge. It highlights the specific anchor points, the corrosion on the main cables, the cracks in the tower bases.
It shows you what could fail under pressure. And that allows the engineers to focus their resources on reinforcing those exact spots.
So you completely change the goal. You stop trying to guess when the collapse will happen because that's unknowable.
Impossible.
And you focus all your energy on identifying the weak links that you can actually strengthen today. You move from being a fortune teller to being a structural engineer.
Yes, and that's all about preparation, which reminds me of how the military trains for things they hope will never happen. That's the best
Hmm.
analogy here. You run a massive, stressful military exercise not because you think an attack is certain.
No, you do it so that when a crisis does hit, you're not trying to figure out your first move from scratch.
You don't have to start thinking when the house is already on fire. If you wait for undeniable proof of a crisis to form a strategy, you're already too late.
The advantage is cognitive speed.
It's all cognitive speed. If you've run the stress test in your head a dozen times, when the shock finally arrives, and it always does, you're deploying a plan, not panicking. Preparation, not prediction. That is the entire goal.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's apply this framework to our favorite case study. The China collapse narrative. It's loud, it's dramatic. But if we filter out the prophecy and just use it as a stress test, what are the real vulnerabilities it keeps pointing to?
The narrative consistently circles back to four critical areas of fragility in the Chinese economy.
Hmm.
And these are real underlying pressures, whether a collapse happens tomorrow or never. First, there's massive indebtedness. And we're not just talking about the central government debt you see in the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the really complex, often hidden debt in what they call local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs, and the shadow banking system that props up the property sector.
Can you just expand on LGFVs for a second? Because I think when most people hear China debt, they picture something simple, like a government bond. Where's the hidden risk there?
The risk is hidden because it's decentralized. Local governments have limits on how much official debt they can take on, so they created these separate companies, LGFVs, to borrow money off the books, mostly for big infrastructure and property projects.
Ah, so when the property market stalls.
Exactly. When the property market hit a wall, the ability of these LGFVs to pay back all that hidden debt it evaporated. We could be talking trillions of dollars in liabilities that aren't on the official balance sheet. That's a genuine structural weakness the narrative forces us to look at.
That immediately gives us a structural where instead of a prophetic when. Okay, what's the second vulnerability the narrative points to?
The real estate market itself, I mean, its size is just staggering. Some estimates say it's up to 30% of the entire country's GDP. The narrative shines a huge spotlight on how leveraged it is.
All the borrowing.
Massive borrowing to build apartments that are now, in many cases, sitting empty or unfinished. Just look at what the Evergrande situation exposed. The ripple effects hit suppliers, banks, and regular household wealth.
It's not just a housing slowdown. It's a crack in one of the main pillars of the economy. And that leads to the third point, which is much harder to fix. Demographics.
That's right. The narrative constantly brings up the rapidly aging population and the shrinking workforce. China is staring down what some people call the demographic cliff.
Because of the one-child policy.
Decades of policy and cultural shifts. It means the working age population that drives in production, consumption, is shrinking fast. And that's a foundational structural weakness that no amount of stimulus can fix overnight. It puts immense pressure on their social security and healthcare systems.
And the fourth risk, the one that connects all these internal problems to the rest of us, geopolitics.
Right. The China decline story almost always includes a fracturing of global trade. You see warnings about trade wars, tech competition, decoupling.
Yeah.
Using this as a stress test, it reveals just how fragile global supply chains are.
How sensitive everything is to a decision made in Beijing or in Washington.
Exactly. And those 4 points, indebtedness, real estate, demographics, geopolitics, that's where the system is most brittle. And this is where the whole black swan idea becomes so useful.
The totally unexpected event.
An unexpected event, by definition, can't be foreseen. You can't predict the event.
But, and this is the key, the system's vulnerability to that event can be identified.
Precisely. You don't know if the next global shock will be a pandemic, a war, or an energy crisis. But if you've done the stress test, you know that when that shock hits the system, it's going to hit the indebtedness link or the real estate link with the most force. You're just locating the fault lines in advance.
So this completely changes the questions we should be asking ourselves. The source material draws a really clear line here. The wrong question, the passive one, is what will happen?
That's asking for a prophecy. It's paralyzing.
But the valuable question, the actionable one, is totally different. It moves from timing to structure. Where will it hurt the most if something happens?
Yes. If you can answer the where today, the LGFVs, the housing market, the supply chains,
Yeah.
you can actually do something about it. If you only ask what, all you can do is wait.
So the goal isn't fear, it's It's training your thinking. It's about using this framework to prepare for a range of possible futures. And that gives you a huge competitive edge, whether you're investing or just planning your business strategy.
It really does. When you use these narratives correctly, you transform them from a source of anxiety into a tool for proactive work.
Yeah.
You have to move from just passively accepting the conclusion to actively analyzing the premises.
Yeah.
And that means practicing three key fundamentals. First, you have to critically question the conclusions. When a story gives you the big dramatic collapse, challenge it. Ask, what if the outcome is just a managed decline or a messy 10-year stagnation?
A muddle through instead of a meltdown.
A forced muddle through is so often the real outcome, and you have to be prepared for that just as much as for the spectacular collapse.
That makes sense. What's the second fundamental?
Second, use a long historical horizon. This is so important. Put today's crisis into context. Are these debt levels truly unprecedented? Or have we seen similar cycles play out in other economies? A long-term view helps you see if something is a temporary storm or a real structural break.
It protects you from the "this time is different" trap.
It's the ultimate defense against it. And third, keep alternative outcomes in mind. Never ever settle for the single predicted crash. Force yourself to game out other scenarios. What if tensions ease? What if there's a policy breakthrough? Thinking through alternatives is what saves you from tunnel vision.
Which is the enemy of any good strategy. So that's the final takeaway then. We shouldn't believe these narratives. We should use them.
Use them. The final output is not a prophecy, which just leads to passivity. The final output is a map that marks the danger zones in red, highlights the weak spots, and encourages you to take action before the shock arrives. A map is for movement, for preparation.
And this deep dive really gives you, the listener, the framework to make that move. I think the big takeaway is that the real competitive advantage in markets, in business, and just understanding the world comes from your ability to filter the signal from the noise, to separate the structural vulnerability from the dramatic prediction. It's about turning potential panic into real, tangible preparation.
And since we know that unexpected events, these black swans, are inevitable, the question is never if a shock will hit, but where your system is weakest when it does. But here's the final thought to take with you today. Look at your own system, your investment portfolio, your business, your career path. If it were a chain, where's the most brittle, weakest link right now? And what are you actively doing to reinforce it before the storm hits? Because that proactive reinforcement, that's the only thing that separates preparation from prophecy.